Hello and welcome to the National Book Festival. My name is Sasha Dowdy and I work at the Library of Congress. I'm here today with Becky Albertalli and Aisha Saeed, whose featured book at the festival this year is Yes, No, Maybe So. If you'd like to see Becky and Aisha's presentation at the festival, log on to nationalbookfestival.com. You'll find them on the teen stage. So welcome, Becky and Aisha. It's so good to have you here and thank you for your time. We are looking forward to seeing some questions from the public and to get this conversation started. It can take a second. So, oh no, we have a first question right away from Emily. All right. Thank you, Emily. It's a question for both of you. Have your children read your book? And if so, how have you been able to talk to them about the issues brought about in your book? If they're currently too young, how do you plan to approach a discussion regarding these issues with them as they get older?
That's such a great question. Also, thank you so much, and we're so glad to be here. It is a huge
Absolutely.
honor, and it's fun to be in DC in spirit, kind of. But yeah, so Aisha may have a more substantial answer than I do because my oldest kid is 8. I would say every single issue that's in the books is something that we've already discussed. So I have my 8-year-old and my little one's about to turn 6. But they have not read any of my books. I think that's more of a just reading level kind of issue. We're much more into, we're kind of in the like Dogman, Last Kids on Earth kind of space right now. So.
Yeah, I think it was so funny. I heard Waleed telling a friend he was holding up our book, Yes, No, Maybe So, and he's like, "Mama wrote a horror story." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "There's kissing in it." He was horrified. I was like, "Sorry." Needless to say, they're not quite the target audience at the moment because they're a little too young. But like Becky said, everything in it we talk about because we have to. I mean, there's and Yes, No, Maybe So. There's anti-Semitism. There's Islamophobia. There's so many topics. And now that the election's ramping up, there's so much talk about politicians and power and how all of that works and how, decisions from up high can affect people and it trickles down. So we aren't at a place yet to read this book yet, but definitely we're discussing all the topics in it.
Great, thank you. Rhiannon has another question for you. How was your writing process different from when you write alone? And what specifically were the advantages and disadvantages of collaborating?
No disadvantages.
Well, there's
I
one
can't think of
disadvantage.
one.
One disadvantage is that I want to collaborate on all my books with you.
It's true. Yeah, the disadvantage is like coming off of collaborating and trying to write solo. So,
For sure. Lots of
yeah,
advantages.
although I will say, like in a general sense, before we dive into the advantages, which is just going to be like a little gush session, y'all are going to have to just bear with us. But the only thing I can think about, this doesn't apply to us, and it doesn't apply to my, my collaboration with Adam Silvera is either. But I think it's important to be very careful about kind of who you enter into a collaboration project with because there does need to be a lot of trust there. It's a very intimate process. It can be like very messy in a kind of creative, artistic sense. So you need to definitely be thinking of those things kind of on the front end because I can't imagine having gone through this process with people who were not some of my closest friends who I completely trust. But the advantages.
There's lots of advantages. I think one of the scariest parts with writing this book was that it was the first time that I was taking a rough draft and showing it to somebody. And that involves so much trust. Like I showed it to Becky and Becky showed to me before we would even be ready to send to our editors, who are typically one of the first people to ever look at a story that we're writing. And so, and that's where the trust comes in. And luckily, Becky and I had known each other since I think 2013 or 14. We've known each other for a while. We were already fans of each other's work, and ever since we met, we're like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to write a story together? It's always been there, this desire to do that. And so, the story came so organically, and I think that's also something that just the universe just, I don't know, it just all worked together to make the story happen. It just came together, even though there's two of us writing it. It just felt like we were working with one mind, just as everything was coming out, the ideas. And it was just so nice. It was so nice to have someone to, if I get stuck at a plot point or at a, story hole or something, I don't have to worry about it myself. I have a friend, I have a partner to talk all of that out with. And I had a partner to tour with and travel with when traveling was a thing. And that was really, really great too. So lots and lots of advantages.
Yeah, it was just, I mean, unbelievably wonderful, like from the very beginning to the end, from the part where, kind of the ideas kind of stack on top of each other and, just become very rich very quickly, I feel like, to just, before the book is out, you actually have somebody to like talk about it with, and to, we were our own little fandom for this book like for a very long time before anybody knew about it. Um, all the way to touring together, and then if there's anything like stressful about that we were like news that we were waiting on, um, or or something frustrating about the process, like we had each other to kind of push through it. So
Yeah, I mean, and there's nobody else. Like, I remember, like, there's some scenes set in Target in the patio section, and like I was walking by when they were unloading it. I think this past season they were just setting up the patio section, and I took a picture of it at Target and I sent it to Becky. I'm like, look, and she's equally as happy as I am. Like, there's only one other person who will get the pure, just excitement and the inside jokes and everything, like, as Becky will, because we wrote it together. So it's just fun to have someone that loves your characters just as much as you do, because they're both of your characters. So that was really special.
It sounds like the best possible serendipity.
Yes.
So, related to the collaboration between the two of you, an anonymous guest would like to know, why did you decide to write the book Yes, No, Maybe So together?
Do you want to take it first? And
yeah, I think well, there never was a yes no maybe, so like this book never existed as a book that could have been written by just one of us. um the idea was something that we came up with together. It was inspired by a real life experience that we had together, that we had shared in the recent past. And you know so so it was never a question of like one of us having this book idea and being like, who would I want to write this with. It was just our our shared baby from the like embryo, the zygote stage. um and I don't know if you want to kind of get into just sort of where that came from a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it was shortly after the 2016 election, which feels so weird to be talking about because it's another one coming up in a few weeks, so please vote. And, we were both reeling from that. It was one of the most devastating outcomes. It was just devastating. And I think shortly after that, there was in Georgia an opening in our district, the 6th district of Georgia. The seat was I think it was Tom Price, right? He was put in Trump's cabinet and was later kicked out and resigned in disgrace, as they usually tend to do. And but at that moment there was this opening, and there's going to be a special election, and it was one of the I think it was one of the very first special elections following that election, the Trump election. And so, and it was in our district. And so Becky and I both decided to utilize the frustration we were feeling, the helplessness, actually do something. And so we signed up to canvass for John Ossoff, who was running to take his place. And John Ossoff is actually running again now for Senate. But at that time, you know, it was just so refreshing to hear someone be unapologetic about his views and promising to stand up. And it just gave us hope. And so we are both on the introvert end of the spectrum, and knocking on people's doors sounded absolutely terrifying. And I'm so grateful that Becky and I could do it together, because I think it really gave me a boost of confidence. And the more we did it, turned out it wasn't that scary at all, actually, because I didn't know that you're not knocking to change people's minds. You're knocking on doors of Democrats, independents maybe, but really you're just trying to get the vote out, reminding people that there's an election. And so yeah, a lot of people didn't open their doors. People who did were usually friendly and nice, and you know, and it was very empowering to know that maybe the people we're talking to might now go vote. And so that was those were the basis. Becky and I were both, I'm Muslim, Becky's Jewish, and we are both walking along and we're like, oh, wouldn't it be interesting to write a story, and you know, a joyful story about hard things, but joyful, because you need some joy and hope. And so yeah, that's kind of how it began, just that election. And even though John Ossoff lost that election, it was we still feel like it was worthwhile. We got so close. I think our district had been solidly red district for almost 40 years. And we got so close. And do you want to share the happy ending to that eventually? That we couldn't have predicted when we wrote the book.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely one of the bright spots of the last couple of years, was, you know, after the 2018 midterms, you know, even though we had lost that, narrowly lost that special election, our congressional seat actually did flip for the first time in, as Aisha said, like 40 years. So we are currently represented by Lucy McBath, who is running again. So if you are a Democrat in our district, I hope that is on your radar. We are, yeah, very excited. Like, you know, it's absolutely bizarre and surreal to be represented by somebody who I feel does represent my interests. It's very new for some of us out here in the Atlanta suburbs, or you know, just some of the red to purple kind of parts of Metro Atlanta area.
And she won by the slimmest of margins. Like it really gave me chills to see how every vote counts, because it was so close. It really came down to who showed up, and it's gonna come down to that again this year too. So yeah.
Great, thank you so much. We have a related question. Joe Yukimura wanted to know, can you tell us the message that you wanted to spread with your book? You've already answered the second part of the question about inspiration, but can you talk about that message?
I think for me, one of the messages is that, you know, like when you talk about, oh, this is a book that covers political stuff, it covers Islamophobia, you know, anti-Semitism, all these different topics. And it's a rom-com. And he was like, really? Those are some pretty heavy topics. But I think a message that I really hope that we got across in this story is that even during the most difficult of times, joy is critical and important. Joy in itself is an act of resistance, to say that even though everything is so hard and difficult, I'm not going to let you break me or make me afraid and just tear me down. I'm going to still find my pockets of humor and laughter and joy. And I do hope that is a message that readers take away from this story.
Yeah, I can't say it better than that.
You seem like such a perfect partnership. So Katie Klenkel's question is perfect. How did the two of you meet, and what were your first impressions of one another?
This is like where, if you read the book, some of these places will be familiar because we wrote them into our book. Like, Yes, No, Maybe So is full of Easter eggs that only Aisha and I will understand. I mean, I guess we will now. So we met on Twitter, I guess, first, or through We Need Diverse Books, maybe. We met online in the writer community. We were both, we had our book deals, and we were going to have our debut YA novels releasing in spring of 2015, and we were both from Atlanta. And so we found each other like very quickly, I would say, like once we were both kind of in that online book community space.
Yeah, and we met at Cafe Intermezzo, which if you read the book, you'll know there's some stuff that goes on there. We met at Cafe Intermezzo, and it was just funny. It felt like a blind date because we'd never actually met. Now we're meeting at this actually, I found out later it's like a first date, like central place. So like it's a good place for a blind date for us, a fun date. And so yeah, we met, and I mean, it felt like I'd known Becky my whole life. Like it was just so organic and comfortable. We both have, kids around the same age, and yeah, and then we've just been friends ever since. And I'd say like we do pre-COVID, we got together to do like lots of, we go to bouncy house places, go to parks, go to different things like that. We even took our kids on a play date to Target. Do you remember that? We just kind of, we like Target, and you'll see that in the books. So yeah. I'm very lucky that Becky is local, and it's great. So glad to know you.
That's a great story. Almost wish you had a meet cute at Target, but this is good too.
I know.
That we know of. Yeah, we may have.
We probably did. Yeah, like
we probably passed by.
Definitely run into the Target. So
incredible. So Stacy's question is about your process of collaboration. How did it work? Who wrote what? Was it divided by character or chapter? There was no division. How did it work?
We so the story is told through 2 points of view. One is Maya, who's Muslim, and one is Jamie, who's Jewish. And Maya's story, the chapters were written by me, and Jamie's stories were written by Becky. But even though we had our own characters that we were writing chapters for, within our chapters, there's still the other characters. So Jamie's in Maya's chapters, Maya's in Jamie's chapters. So so that's why being on the same page with your collaborator is so important, because you are going to be writing from their point of view too. So so we wrote our own chapters, but then of course afterwards, as you edit and everything, you're doing that together over the whole book, right?
Yeah, and it was really it was, those particular moments that Aisha just described, where our characters are, I mean, they are very frequently in each other's chapters. They are the love interests for each other. But I think one of the cool things that I don't necessarily think that I realized going into it, but I learned so much just about just and kind of making it very clear that Muslim people and Jewish people are, not monolithic.
Right.
Rather than saying like I learned a lot about what it's like to be Muslim, I would say I learned a lot about what Aisha's faith means to her, and kind of how which
and vice versa.
Yeah, and I love that. We were in there, just making little tweaks to the language of just like the different ways that people in our respective communities would convey certain concepts. Yeah, I don't know how I made this a question about religion, but I was just like, yeah, Aisha went to my synagogue, like we toured mine and Jamie's temple, yeah, so, and John also synagogue as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was definitely part of it. That was definitely part of it, is because the book, faith is one of the undercurrents in it. And so understanding where we both came from. And like Becky said, Muslims are not a monolith. The way I practice may not be the same as another Muslim who practices. So this book was deeply personal, I think, for both of us, because it really was an exploration of our faith and the way we connect. So yeah, you're right. It wasn't, I guess, an answer to the question, but that was really
Yeah.
important in making this book. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was a really important part of it, kind of in terms of the POV, because
Yeah.
there was so much of that kind of personal and also like community experience that went into each point of view character. So
Yeah.
It sounds like you have a really nice relationship, but another guest wants to push at that a little bit, maybe. How did the two of you incorporate both of your ideas without stepping over one another? Were there any standstills when it came to an agreement on how to move forward with the plot?
No, it just
no,
didn't
yeah,
happen.
it's very
I
disappointing, I know.
like, I know it may seem like, oh, come on, there must have been something. There really wasn't.
Yeah.
And I think that truly speaks to being careful about who you collaborate with, right? Like, before we began to write the book, we actually talked through it, and we were like, oh, and then this would happen. What do you think about this? And Becky was like, what about this? And so we didn't dive into this not knowing what we were going to write about. We knew what we were going to write about. We knew what the ending was going to be. We knew the characters, the beats, like all of that was agreed upon before we actually got into the process of writing. Maybe if we hadn't done that, maybe we could have run into standstills, but it was important because Becky is like one of my best friends. And so I feel like that relationship is the most important. And so we were careful and mindful of that. And that's why we decided everything in advance, and we made sure that we were on the same page before we began writing. And I think if anybody who's listening wants to collaborate, that's really important.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the only thing I would add is just, I really think that kind of as we are working on this project at every stage of it, like it has always felt like our book, not kind of my half and Aisha's half, you know? So,
Mhm.
you know, as we are kind of because we planned it in advance, but as you're writing, certain things change.
Mhm.
But that was just like kind of an opportunity to kind of sit there together and like unravel whatever plot point that was not working, and coming up with a solution together. It just never felt like we were, butting heads at all.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So, how did you face difficulties together since you were always together on the same page? We have a question from Melis. What did you guys do when you hit a writer's block?
Hmm. I will say that for me, anytime I face a blank page, there's terror.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh no, like I can't do this chapter, like it's scary, like that's always my initial gut feeling, and then you just dive in. I don't know, Becky, did we hit anything like that you can think of?
Yeah, that's such a hard question. It's interesting is like, and I found this is true with both of my collaborations, is that like definitely writer's block is a thing. Like as I'm sitting down to work on a chapter, and certain chapters come more easily than others. But I have found that kind of having a collaborator and stuff like does keep like I don't remember what's the expression is, like keeps everything moving. There's probably something related to oil. I don't know.
Because someone's waiting for the next chapter, and so I
Mhm.
think it's actually it's motivating. I do
Yeah.
I get roadblocks in my regular books, I will say. Like there are days that I feel like I've hit a wall. With this book, I don't know, I guess also when I hit a roadblock on a solo book, I don't have anyone to talk to about it, so I could just text Becky and say, hey, I'm stuck, I don't know, like this, and then she'll like we'll just talk it out. So I think in that way this writing went faster and less painful because of that reason for me.
I know. I'm sorry. Our answers, I feel like, are so disappointing. We really, like, you have to
Give us
understand, we
drama.
really miss each other. It's like been a long pandemic. I promise we're not always this nice. Like, if you want to get us talking about like certain political people, and like, um, like um, we would have more negative things to say probably. Like, so.
So you are so organic talking together, and Tessa has a question about your characters. Their conversations are all so realistic to those of normal high schoolers. How do you accomplish this realness?
Thank you so much. That's like, yeah, it's, like either, it depends on any given reader too, I should say, like, whether a conversation or just any kind of like beat of a book, like whether that kind of lands in a way that feels authentic to the reader. It's a little bit of a leap of faith, like when you put it out there and you kind of know going into it that like some readers are going to think it is like, get out of my head. This is the most realistic thing I've ever read. And some readers are going to say, like, have they ever been teenagers? Have they met teenagers? Like, this is like, um, so a lot of it just depends on just kind of your own life experiences and kind of the lens that you're bringing to the story as a reader. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, you wanna,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. Like, I'm sure you'll find people that don't think that, right? Like, but I think for us, both of us, we have done so many events, and like I know I do lots of school visits, and I think it's important. Like, you can't be out of touch with the people that you're writing for. And so I think that's important, and that's part of being a writer for the audience that you're writing for. You have to pay attention to what matters to those readers. So thank you.
Great. So you're both obviously very talented authors. And Ken Lin has a question. What steps did you each take to become a writer as a profession? Did you study writing, plan for this in school, or did it happen more organically?
that's a great question. That's an especially great question to ask when you've got two authors here, because every author is going to have such a different journey.
Mhm.
So that's something to keep in mind, and we're going to probably give you two very different stories if you want to dive in first.
Yeah, for me, I love to write since I was a kid. I've always written stories in the margins of like my notebooks when we're supposed to be doing math. Like, I'm like writing a story. I loved writing fan fiction, although I didn't know it was called fan fiction at the time. But I did Little Mermaid fan fiction, Aladdin fan fiction, Disney theme there. And but I never really thought of it as something that I was going to do as my profession. I was a teacher. I went to law school. I practiced law. I worked at legal aid. But all through those times, like, I still wrote stories on the side, but I never really thought that I could ever get published. But then I had one particular story idea, and I was just so driven to write it. And after I was done writing it, I thought, I think this could be a story. I think this story could get published. And so that was my debut. And yeah, but it's you don't have to major in English. You don't have to get an MFA. You really have to be passionate about telling stories. And I think another factor in getting published is you have to have persistence and not giving up, and knowing that writing, even I'm on my, I don't know, my 10th book at the moment, and it's still hard. It feels just as hard as the first book. The only difference is that now I know that there will be an end to this, and that I will feel better after I'm done. Like, but that feeling stays there. So yeah, so that was kind of my path. It was unexpected. It happened, and I feel so fortunate though. But it wasn't the path that I initially started out on.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, maybe my path isn't that different from yours, which I knew, but yeah, so just like, again, like some people do study writing, and some people get a lot of value out of that, and some people get a lot of value out of an MFA program. That's not
Hmm.
a path that I took at all, and certainly is not something that you need. Like, you can be a writer without a writing degree. You can be a writer without taking a single creative writing course. for me, similarly, she's like a bookworm kid who loved to like write stories, and then I wrote fan fiction, and then like, and didn't think I could make a career out of it. And I became a psychologist, and then unexpectedly got published. So like I would say that beats of that are the same. I will say I'm one thing that Aisha should be extremely proud of is you went from writing Aladdin fan fiction to like literally being hired to write Aladdin stories like like yours like tied to the film like
That was the most surreal thing. I'm like, wait, you're paying me to do this now as an adult? So,
yeah. I mean, like that is something like, don't you just want to like go back in time and just leave a little review maybe on your Aladdin fan fiction in the future? Just like,
yeah, this isn't really procrastination. It's going to lead to something.
yeah.
So unfortunately, we are already somehow at the end of our time. I hope you can take this opportunity to answer this final question as quickly as you can. But Kaheen wants to know, what small joy will you savor today?
Oh,
Hey, somebody is following me on Twitter. Oh my goodness. This, I'm savoring this. I'm savoring getting to answer your questions right now. I feel so grateful to be part of this and to see Becky's face. We used to see each other so regularly, and now it's through screens. So yeah, I'm grateful, and this is my small joy that I will savor today.
I was gonna say Animal Crossing, but I like that Aisha said. So.
Animal Crossing too, always and forever. Yes.
Well, thank you so much to both of you, Becky and Aisha, for sharing your time with us so generously today. At the National Book Festival, we're so grateful to you. Thank you. We've been speaking. Yeah, thank you. We've been speaking with Becky Albertalli and Aisha Saeed, whose latest book is Yes, No, Maybe So. You can find their presentation on the teen stage of the National Book Festival at nationalbookfestival.com.